All right, we're 5 minutes in, so let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's primary working group. As always, by being here, we have agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, and the code of conduct. Links to all of these are available in the agenda file. First, let's start with a round of introductions. We'll go in the order that we are in the agenda file. So that starts with me. Hello, everyone. My name is Benji.
Hey everyone, I'm Yovi.
Hi, I'm Benoit from Apollo.
And Martin from Apollo as well. I think Stefan is here. I think Stefan, you're next. He's not here.
Sorry. Hello, I'm Steven.
Hey everyone, I'm Rob.
My PR is still open, but hi, I'm Jeff.
Matt and Quay.
So I don't have Kawhi in the room. I think she's gonna be...
I'm here.
Oh.
Sorry.
Kawhi, I'm in the room. Oh, one of us needs to. Yeah. Okay. So, and then Curtis is muted there.
I am Curtis. Sorry, we're trying to confirm the situation. It's like the whole mess.
Okay, lovely. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so let's determine who's able to take notes today. Is anyone able to volunteer to do that? Ideally, a couple of people would be fantastic. Perfect. Thank you, Yovi.
Oh, okay. Somebody volunteered.
Awesome. Okay, looks like we've got quite a lot of things on the agenda today, so let's have a quick scan through those. We will be reviewing the prior secondary meetings. I'm not sure if they actually went ahead or not. We'll have a look in a moment. We have previous meeting action items, talking about the GraphQL grant program refresh, strict error paths from Martin, calls for reviews from Yovi, string literal aliases proposal from Curtis and Matt, and then on to me to potentially talk about getting some of my various editorial PRs merged and to talk about the extensions property on request again, like we did over a year ago. Is there anything else that anyone else would like to add to the agenda? No, in which case, let's get started. First of all, reviewing the previous meetings, I don't think that either of them went ahead. And in fact, yes, I was the only attendee for the secondary EU meeting. So I just closed that one off. And I'm not sure that anyone went to the APAC one. Action items. I'm looking now at those that are ready to review. No results matched your search, so none ready for review. We do have a few open. There are a few that are targeted at everyone. First of all, we have the TSC elections. Those are now complete. We actually did talk about that last month, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. A reminder that everyone should be checking their implementation. We're talking about changing the requirements on error paths from a should to a must. So if you currently are not implementing error paths where you should be, let us know if that's going to cause you any problems when you must do that. There's a couple of things on Lee, which I'll skip over. A couple of things on myself that haven't been advanced. There is a request for everyone to review the full schemas RFC. That is on Martin. Martin, how do you feel? Do you feel that that's something that can be closed now?
Let me dig the thing. Review full schema RFC. Do we want to close the action item or do we want to close the RFC?
Just the action item. If you feel that people have had enough time and you've got the feedback that you need, it would be good to close it.
It's still up in the air a little bit. Well, there is still this question of I'm not 100 what the path forward is, to be honest.
Maybe then it might be worth closing this as an action item and you bringing it to a future working group to discuss again.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close that for now then. I've requested that everyone review changing execute selection set to execute grouped field set, which is not really a change in behavior, just a change in the way that we express the algorithms. Let me have a quick scan over that. Yakov and Rob have had a look at this. If anyone else wants to have a look at that, I would appreciate it. But I'm going to go ahead and close that item. I've posted the link to the pull request in the chat nonetheless. Let's close that. That's since September, so no one's looked at it yet. Michael, are you here? You're not. Okay. Stephen, you're here. There was an add validations to GraphQL JS about deprecated on object. Did that progress?
No, that is still pending. There was some interest in someone doing some more JavaScript work, but yeah, no, that is still pending.
Okay, we'll leave that one open. And Yakov's not here. Okay, I think that'll do for today. Thank you very much, everyone. We did get to close a few action items, which is always a pleasure. Okay, on to the GraphQL grant program refresh. So that's me. Hello, everyone. We have been running for the last few years a grants program at the GraphQL Foundation. We've not been particularly good at organizing it, I've got to admit, but hopefully we're going to get better. And as part of that, we are switching to a continuous process for it. So the idea is that people will be able to apply at any time. Hopefully, myself and Jory will act as a first row of filtering to make sure that the applications are reasonable and sensible. And if they are, we'll then pass them over as soon as we can to the TSC for a fuller review. And assuming the TSC are happy and think that this is something worth funding and they agree with the funding amounts or they want to suggest an alternative amount, we would then get back to you about your application. So the aim of this is to make it so that our round time from you applying to you getting a response from us is much tighter. And I should also mention that I am now going to be quite heavily involved in this process. So there will be a face that you see at these meetings that you can actually talk to about your application, check where it is in the pipeline. Previously, it was been a bit opaque, a bit of an opaque process. So more transparency, faster timelines. We're also being much more explicit about the areas that we are able to fund at the moment, which is basically foundation projects. So anything on github.com/GraphQL, anything on the GraphQL.org website itself, similar things like that. Blog posts, documentation, code, RFCs, anything that you want to help advance. So if, for example, you worked on an RFC a year ago, but you haven't had the time to finish it up or get it through that next step, and some funding might help that, please apply. If you have any questions about the grants program, please reach out to me. DM me on Discord is one of your best options there. Also, have a read of the blog post, have a read of the application page, and apply. Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay. In which case, I will hand over to Martin on strict error paths.
Oh, wow, okay. So let me dig up the pull request. This is number 1073, and let me share my screen. All right, so the context is nullability and errors. So in the specification today, there is this language here that says about when there is an error in a response, it says the path should be a list of path segments started at the root of the response and ending with the field associated with the error. So it makes sense, but it's a should here and it's not a must. And in the context of nullability, and we have this semantic non-null type that says, well, a field can be null if it has an error, but it can never be null if it doesn't have an error. And if we want to be able to parse the error and know if there is an error, we actually need to, well, to be able to parse that field. So we need to have more strict knowledge about how it looks like. So the proposal is to change, and if I go to the proposal, it's to change a lot of should here in the spec, in must. I think this one is currently RFC1. Where do I see the label? Oh, it's RFC2 already. Damn, missed that. So the question is, what do we want to do there? Do we want to give it a bit more time for everyone to review? Do we want to merge that? How do we move forward here?
So RFC2's, go on.
Oh, yeah, how many TSC people would we need to get it in? Because we already have 2 approvals. Could we just get the rest quickly? I don't know. That's kind of my attitude, is this feels very obvious. We should be getting it in quicker than slower, and that's probably just a TSCs who have attended a working group meeting in the last 3 months need to weigh in, I think.
Yeah, I think we need a quorum of active TSC members, which is, as you say, people who have attended a working group meeting in the last 3 months. And with that, we could merge it. I think it might make sense to wait just 1 more month just to give any other implementations a chance to feedback. But yeah, I'm keen that if we don't have any hesitation by beginning of April, we merge it at the next working group. I've not heard anyone have any concerns with this. but equally, I've not really had much. I think we pinged the implementers group on GitHub and not really had much engagement from that.
GraphQL Java is okay. Yeah.
I think we need
So
to get better at talking to the different maintainers of the various GraphQL implementations.
maybe Discord? So let's keep it open one more month, and we reconvene next month.
Yeah, that sounds
the
great.
plan?
If anyone knows a maintainer or can reach out to a maintainer of the various different implementations, please do so. Please check with them. Have them feedback, even if it's just a thumbs up. That would give us more confidence. But I think it's fine, and I think we should merge it as Matt says. So next month, then, Martin, you're going to add it to the agenda again?
Sounds good. Will do.
Should we make a note in the GitHub issue of our intent to go ahead and merge it next month, just to make sure everyone gets their feedback in?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Matt, are you able to do that now?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So that's all from you, Martin?
That's all.
Perfect. On to Yovi for your call for reviews.
All right. Yeah, I didn't know how else to do this. I have two open PRs on the spec, one for fragment arguments, which is a revive of the work that Matt started a year ago. It would be highly appreciated if people could just give it a read. I guess we'll need to go through the same process of pinging implementers. And the other spec PR is a minor wording change for our use of composite in the spec text. And then the third one is the parser implementation for fragment arguments. And in the description, there's also the implementation for execute. For currently, only Matt has reviewed the fragment arguments one.
On the composite pull request, I see that Lee has commented and he's mentioned that it is a word that is used throughout the GraphQL JS repository, and as such is most likely used in various different implementations as well. He's not exactly stated that that's a problem, just commented that it is a fact. We may or may not want to address that. I don't think we should change the function name in GraphQL JS from is composite type to is object or union or interface type. That is unpleasant. But yeah, explaining where the term composite has come from may be an interesting challenge. Do you think maybe we should address that with a non-normative note in the spec that we can say oftentimes the word composite is used to refer to these three types of thing?
Yeah, that is a good alternative. I'm okay with that, as long as we clarify it.
Would you be happy to add that to your pull request?
Yeah, I'll add that as an action item for myself.
Perfect.
Do we want to revive the glossary? I think there is a glossary somewhere. Would that be a good place for this? Doesn't look like we want to. So spec is good, non-normative not it is.
Yeah, I was just finding the link for that. So there is a glossary that we potentially proposed as an Appendix C. In the end, rather than introducing a glossary, we added a definitions feature, or I say we, Lee added a definitions feature to SpecMD, which is the software that we use to build the spec. So now when you declare things in a particular way, I think it starts with 2 colons or something, the first underlined, the first italic text becomes a definition, and then they get hyperlinked throughout the document. We don't currently collect those all together in a glossary so that you can look at them at the end. And this would be a case of something that we'd like to define, but then isn't actually used anywhere else in the spec. So it wouldn't fit the current SpecMD solution. So a glossary is an interesting idea, but I think it would be a big lift just to add this one thing into it to define an entire glossary.
Makes sense.
Okay, so yes, please everyone have a look at those various pull requests, keep things moving along, and thank you for your work on this. Let's move on to string literal aliases proposal with Curtis and Matt.
Hey, so from Meta, really like there's a proposal, but it is a pretty biggish change. So really this is more sharing some context about what we're doing at Meta, getting a sense of how open source community feels about this, and then sharing some more context about the broader need of what is the broader problem that we're solving. So one of the main things that we need to support in our GraphQL clients is this concept of data consistency. So when you have multiple screens that are fetching GraphQL data over GraphQL, if you fetch the same field on the same object and the data changes, we want a surface to update with the new information. The canonical example that we have is if you from the Facebook feed, you navigate to say a page and you like that page or you join this group or something like that. When you navigate back, we want to show that, hey, maybe the button now says updates from join group to you're in the group. I don't actually know what the text says, but we want these interactions that happen across the app or across different queries in the same session to update one another. We do this today we've done this through various ways. One of the ways, and Relay actually does this too, is they ship with a mapping of the alias name to what we call the canonical name. So that the canonical name is, we strip out the alias, it is the field name plus field arguments. So, it's really, if you just look at the selection, you cut off the alias. So we ship a mapping of that. We take the response when we parse it, we map from alias to the canonical name, and we normalize it inside of some cache in memory. And that allows us to update surfaces, etc. An alternative way that we've tried doing this is totally spec breaking, is a server transformation that takes your alias and field name and actually converts it into a canonical name. So the client doesn't have to ship with this mapping. It's very expensive to do this. It's a lot of binary size, a lot of memory, etc. But doing the server transformation is a lot of GCPU. So both were not that great. And so right now we are experimenting with this thing where we are using the alias to literally encode the canonical name. But the canonical name, like I mentioned, can include illegal characters in the GraphQL spec. An alias follows a name value, which is alphanumeric plus underscore and cannot begin with a number. Whereas here we need to be able to embed parentheses. We need to be able to have the field arguments themselves might be a string, right? And a string can include anything. And so you really need to be able to use any characters in the string value set. So we have two things that we're trying right now. One is we're trying to understand whether we can do this without changing the spec. We are running an experiment in production for Meta on the Facebook app, where we are using a custom escape format, where we use the letter Z as an escape character, because it's the least commonly used character in the GraphQL alphabet. We ran some analysis. And so, you know, this increases payload size, increases client parse time. We have ran some previous iterations of this experiment before, and it showed some pretty like non-trivial regressions in terms of like booms, like memory out of memory exceptions, parse exception, CPU exceptions, parsing time increases, etc. We are relatively optimistic in our next test that we can get that to like basically neutral, but it is still about a 2% regression that, you know, we're not totally sure about. Given that context, the alternative is a spec change, which adds, which adds like use, what do you call it, double quotes, to use string value format or character set for aliases. And this would allow us to just write the canonical name legally into the alias and have that be delivered over the wire. I believe that it is JSON spec compliant as well. It would be efficient on both server and client, and it would solve all of our problems, except for the fact that it is, again, a spec change. So the discussion that we wanted to get, or the feeler that we wanted to get, is if the alternative, an efficient encoding of you know, this canonical name using the alias is not performant enough, which is still a TBD, and that is our preferred approach if it is performant enough. If that is not, though, how would we feel about extending the spec to allow string literal aliases? And then, you know, how do folks in general feel about this problem of data consistency? Is this a real need outside of Meta? Is this a Meta only kind of problem? Do folks, you know, care about this? I assume I've heard some needs of it outside of Meta, so I assume that is a thing. And how do people solve that outside of you know, in industry? So I spoke a lot there.
I can talk for Apollo Kotlin. We have the same issue, and we do what I think you mentioned at the beginning, is that we ship side data. So for Apollo Kotlin, it's CodeGen, but this contains all the canonical paths, and it hasn't been a concern so far, but maybe we can actually get some more improvement from there. So really curious about this.
Yeah, for context, and this is like shocking numbers to me, is that like the Facebook app, you know, it uses GraphQL everywhere, and I think we ship like megabytes of
we have thousands of queries, not fragments, queries in the app, and probably tens of thousands of fragments, and like, yeah, it gets very expensive, and one response, like the shape of one response can be encoding, I don't know, like a single response sometimes can get huge. We're not necessarily using that entire response on every, or like the entire shape on every response, because depending on what features are available, depending on what surface you're on, but like we have to load up that entire bit of code just to be able to walk this alias format.
I think part of the reason it hasn't been an issue yet is we're mainly Android apps. So, you know, we don't have as much bundle size issues. I mean, we do have it, but it's downloaded once and then it's there forever. So that might explain, but in all cases, looks like a win. Like, looks like we could save some stuff here.
So it sounds like it's just a sanity check. Is the problem or context clear? It sounds like we do have similar problems outside of Meta. So for example, Apollo deals with similar things. And then I guess that last part, how do people feel about this proposal in general? Is there like immediate like, this is ridiculous, we'll never do this, or really we want to start this conversation and not do things that's too divergent if it comes to it.
I do have one question. Like, I wasn't entirely clear. So in the normalized cache you mentioned, you use your field name and you encode the field arguments in there. Where is that lacking in terms of like data consistency currently?
Oh, it doesn't. No, that is how it would still continue to work.
Oh, okay.
This is purely an optimization of the network so that we don't have to translate what's coming in over the wire. Like, basically, can we get what's coming in over the wire directly into our store? Or do we need some format, some static metadata that tells us how to translate what comes in over the wire into the consistent cache?
Okay, gotcha.
But you still need to do a combination for that to work anyway, right? Because you need to take your template and you need to insert your variable values into it.
Yeah, so we do at runtime. It's never, well, we have experimented with doing the full canonical name over the wire and quickly discovered that because of objects, input types, that explodes way too quickly in size. The payload size becomes huge.
It's also it relies on server and clients like serializing JSON formats the same way, which is kind of like a big not actually true thing. So yeah, we rolled that out pretty quickly.
But the question is, can we reduce the amount of things we need in memory in order to make that transformation? Stephen?
Yeah. So with this solution, if you had the same item appear multiple times in the same response, it would still be coming over the wire denormalized. Is that right? And this would just aid kind of normalizing, smashing it together into the cache. And so in theory, if those came from different resolvers and they were inconsistent, like that's still possible. It would just, choose one of them, I guess, and stuff that in the cache or something.
Correct. But yeah, that's the exact same problem we already have. If it's at a different layer of the tree,
right.
If it's at the same layer of the tree, then it'll be merged. And this actually solves one issue, which is like, how do you modularize fragments that don't use aliases but have different arguments in the same field? The answer that we're proposing is that the compiler doesn't care and gives the alias for basically all of them. So if they happen to have the same, it overlaps, and if not, if they're different arguments, then it's a different alias, and that's fine.
For what it's worth, I'll say we solved this early on at Netflix, probably before we ran into it. It was probably a premature solving and that was basically Falcor and the JSON graph design, and so there's definitely some benefits to that, but going to GraphQL, we've been just we haven't done any special workarounds to make it work, and so far we haven't we haven't seen really regressions there, but we do definitely have that same need to normalize across across your experience. So but it would be definitely interesting to see if in GraphQL we're able to make this more like more mainstream, a way to normalize Now, one element of that we do in Falcor is references, so that then if you have one thing in your response, it's only in one spot. And so, if we wanted to go down this road, I wonder if that would be something we'd want to consider as well as a mechanism for that, so that then in the response body things are, there's an option for denormalizing.
No idea if we raised
Yeah, you raised it, but we can, Martin, do you have? You're muted.
Sorry. Did you consider something like meta fields, like __ canonical path or something like this? Like getting the server to return it?
Like, is the question like in line? So you have the regular field that has like whatever. So photo size 30, where photo is what's returned, and then we have __ canonical name for photo or something. And then, so whenever there are fields with arguments, there's basically 2 fields returned.
Yeah, but yeah, that doesn't work for Scala, so that works only for
What? No.
Oh.
You're
Yeah, so there was a couple of interesting things. It sounds like there is this need for like an in-memory cache normalization consistency thing. Like, would it be valuable? Because like, internally at Meta, we have basically collected together a number of features or things that we do that make up this ecosystem of how we do normalization. We have this directive called @strong, which is how you represent the same object in the graph or in a schema. We have canonical naming, represents how do you map fields or aliases into their canonical versions of themselves. We have this thing called fetchable. So we've like done a bunch of thinking about canonicalization or normalization of data. Would it be valuable if we were to say more cohesively put this together? And then secondly, I think, Stephen, you mentioned having references in the response and then only including it once. We have played around with an idea that we internally called graph mode, which was to send down, instead of a denormalized like JSON response, a pre-normalized like a list of objects with references that reference one another. And one of the concerns that we had was about how well it streams as you compute it on the server. And I'm curious, I'm happy to chat with you elsewhere on this, but that is an interesting idea that we have also thought about. Anyways,
so I think
what do you?
The GraphQL Crunch is an open implementation of that kind of thing, and there's a few of them out there. One of them just only uses arrays, so it does like tuple format, and then at the end it like gives you all the keys, or at the beginning, I forget which. GraphQL Crunch is another implementation which I've put into the chat. It's an interesting idea, and one of the things I was wondering is, have you considered building it as a protocol extension on top of GraphQL, where you effectively put the details of this into the extensions object? Effectively, you could have objects that were keyed by path effectively, and then here is the template to use for this given path anytime that you see it.
I think so. I think the payload size regression would probably be non-trivial, because we see arguments throughout the entire graph. So for example, the feed payload is probably nearing 10,000 lines of a response. And so it would be a little bit challenging to send down separately all of the information, which is why we were leaning into this. How can we embed it into the response itself? I don't know. I do think there's something worth playing around there.
I mean, arguably, if you were to use really short, I feel if you're replacing all the aliases anyway, you could replace
Yeah,
them
yeah.
in turn _0, _1, _2, _3,
Mm.
whatever, all the way through, and then just have a basic lookup for those. And I suspect that the actual size of the payload would be smaller, the actual decompressed JSON. I don't know what the compression would do, but the decompressed JSON I would expect to be smaller.
That's an interesting idea, actually. Yeah.
So
and combining
just
those two things.
Just to highlight some related concerns, not specifically on yours, but there are the fact that name is so limited is quite controversial in GraphQL. And one of the reasons that we do it is because this character set, alphanumeric and underscore, basically works everywhere, works in almost every programming language without needing any special handling. But it is very, very common for non-English speakers to want their enum values to be in their native language, to want their field names to be in their native language. And at the moment, name doesn't allow this. So though this wouldn't be addressing name itself, it would allow for you to put things in front. I have very significant concerns about it, though, especially when we factor in things like Unicode and zero width spaces and joiners and, I mean, emojis and variants of emojis and so on, where these things look the same, but they're actually different. It's very easy right now to look at a GraphQL field name or alias name and know exactly what it is and see character for character. You still have confusions with L's and ones, perhaps, depending on what your font is. But broadly, it's pretty obvious. But once we start opening this to a broader system, that may become more challenging. I also think it looks unpleasant. So I think there would be quite a high barrier to get this in, but it definitely does sound like this is a need that the ecosystem have for normalization. So finding a solution to it is definitely desired.
Anything else you want to add? Yeah, really just want to start that discussion. Thank you for all the feedback. You know, this is one of those things that internally, again, we've been talking about for the longest time, and having a more open discussion about it was one of the goals of bringing it to the group.
Yeah, so I think it's very solidly right now, the RFC is a straw man.
No intentions of actually merging it. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And yeah, I'm going to keep thinking about it as well from other directions. I gave you a few thoughts, which you shot down very effectively. So I'm going to keep thinking along those lines, see where we can get to. It's an interesting one.
It was really fun because I think a lot of the suggestions you made, internally, it overlapped with a lot of the discussions we've had internally, and it was kind of like, we do have some data on a lot of these things already prior to wanting to make the best of the time that we have here. So yeah, no, definitely, I highly appreciate all the feedback.
Awesome. Sounds like we are good to move to the next item, which is me. Okay. Oh, yes, this will be fun. Okay, so I looked the other day, I have 23 open pull requests against the GraphQL spec. I'd like to get these under control a little bit. Some of them are like one-word changes, so I'd like to get some of those merged. I have added 4 of them to the agenda. Let's go through them in the order that they are in the agenda. So first of all would be pull request number 1016, which is to fix response error to request error. This is a one-word change, barely even a whole word, to be honest. Effectively, we went through before and clarified what a query error was, replaced it with a request error because it doesn't just relate to queries, it also applies to mutations and subscriptions as well. So we replaced that with request error, and we missed a response error, which was just a term used on its own in one position in the entire specification. So yeah, I moved that we merge that. And in fact, it's got double TSC approval. It's editorial. So unless there's any hesitations, which there does not seem to be, I'll go ahead and merge that. Perfect. In fact, Quay, do you want to merge that for me so I'm not merging my own pull requests? Thank you. Perfect. Okay, next up is 1032. So this relates to some common, let me just check my facts before I state that. Yeah, this relates to some common misreading of the GraphQL specification when it talks about serial execution of a selection set. So we say that mutations have serial execution of a selection set, and then we give examples of a selection set that needs to be executed serially. And a lot of people get confused because when they read the selection set, they think that it's a query using the shorthand. So what I've done is I've changed one of the examples to be a mutation operation and explicitly said the selection set inside of this mutation operation to clarify the wording there. In the other case, I've added a note at the top of the example to make it very explicit that this is a selection set and not an operation. And then generally, I've added the definition of what a selection set is, which apparently we don't have, or at least I didn't manage to find in the spec. And I've then gone through and made various incarnations of that a link back to its definition. So this is using the SpecMD feature that I thought we discussed earlier, but I've just realized it was on a different call, different GraphQL call. Any particular thoughts on this one? Mostly it's a lot of noise from me adding underscores.
Benji, the line 403, is that even a valid query? A valid mutation? It should have.
It doesn't need a name if that's what you're asking, or variables.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it does. It does need the variable to be defined. Actually, that's a good catch.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because it looked a little bit weird. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Variable. I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent catch.
Oh,
I now need to find out what type the new birthday field should be.
And then the rest looks good. Oh, someone else is trying to speak.
Oh, I was saying snarkily just make it a change birthday to random day mutation so that you don't need the variable in it.
We could definitely do that.
Yeah.
Or we could remove the mutation and just go back to calling it a selection set, since that's what it is. I think we'll fix it by adding a variable. Okay, I'll make that change, and then we can, if the TSC decide to approve it after that, we can look to move ahead. Otherwise, I'll bring it up in another working group. Next up is 894, which is clarify before execution begins in response. We have text somewhere, not sure where, that refers to the concept of before execution begins, but we don't define that anywhere. And in fact, surprisingly, the execute request function, execution begins halfway through the execute request function, because one of the first things that it does is it coerces the variable values, and variable values are coerced before we actually start executing the operation. So a request error could be thrown when you try and coerce the variable values, where we say, sorry, those variables aren't valid. We're not going to continue. We're not actually going to bother executing anything because the input is invalid. So in order to help with clarifying that text, I have added a non-normative note that says that request errors, which include those raised during execute request, occur before execution begins. And when a request error is raised, the data entry should not be present in the result. That should is not a normative note. It is not a normative word because it's inside a note. It's just a comment that is generally the case. I think it's always the case. Maybe I should change it to will.
Just very fast feedback. I probably should comment on this, but whatever. The including those raised during execute requests feels very awkward because occur before execution begins. Execution, if I'm just perusing, execution and execute request sound isomorphic. I know you just explained that they are not. Is there a function that we can use, just like we have the execute request function for the before execution, the actual like execution function that is called?
So I found the term where this is used, and it's literally just a few lines above. It's in the bit that GitHub's collapsed. It's line 44. If an error was raised before execution begins, the data entry should not be present in the result. So just for clarity there. So you were proposing, Matt, that we slightly change execute requests structure?
I'm not confident that the note adds clarity versus what's written above, but that.
Yeah, since this is a note, Benji, would you think like including those raised during execute requests, such as such as variable validation, and that would clarify things, right? A little bit more. Yes. Because I think I understand what Matt is saying. The function name is called execute request, and then you are saying before executing the request, which essentially, fundamentally, it's an indication this function does way too much that it should be named. So I think we can just add examples, like, for example, coercing variables or validate variables, so that people understand this is a massive function and does more than what it does, what it says it does. And I think we should be good to go after. So do you want us to approve with notes, and you can?
Yeah, that's fine. Another option based on what you've just said is we could actually change the previous paragraph, the one on line 44, and say, instead of saying before execution begins, we could say before execution of the operation begins. And that way that splits the operation execution from the request execution. So request does variable validation, and then
before execution of the selection set begins.
Of any selection set,
of any selection set.
Well, no, because hang on, because it interacts also with subscriptions. I think if you fail to generate an event stream for a subscription, that is also a request error.
Ah, okay.
And I think that is actually also before you execute any selection sets, because you're not executing a selection set when you get that. You get the field,
Yes.
then you get the subscribe for it, and then on the result
Yes.
of that, you then execute. That's actually, yeah. It's precise. Is it accurate? I think it's accurate. I'll tell you what, I'll take that under advisement. I'll make some changes and I'll bring it back next month.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you for the feedback on that. Much appreciated. This sounds like it should be easy. Next one is 1069. Enforce consistent punctuation in algorithms. Oh, yeah, fun. So we sometimes end algorithms with full stops. We sometimes don't. We, in some cases, have forgotten to wrap variables with curly braces. When we do like a for loop or an if statement, we generally put a colon, like for blah, 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 colon, and then some nested stuff inside of it, but we don't always do that. And so on and so forth. And this upsets some people, and rightly so, in my opinion. A spec should be very well defined.
Yes.
So what I've done, what I've done is I have written some JavaScript that will go through, split the spec up based on the spec text that you've written, analyzes the English language that we've used there using a collection of regexes, which is obviously the correct way to do this, and then make sure that we adhere to our own rules. I've then gone and applied these rules. Basically, it works. Don't worry too much about the JavaScript. The result in the actual spec text is what we care about. So yeah, this is very much an editorial pull request.
I'm impressed, you know, you're using regex, which is supposed to only work for regular languages, and you worked it on something that is, you know, close to Turing complete, right? It's not Turing complete, but it's close to Turing complete, how you were able to do that.
Yeah, fun times, fun times. Mostly it's because I was too lazy to just read through the spec fully myself. So I was like, a series of regexes will do this. And when I got bored of writing Vim macros, I wrote the JavaScript instead. I think all you need to do really is just look over the fact that we're adding colons and stuff. It's pretty straightforward, and has 2 approvals. I'll leave you
if you want it.
You can go ahead and merge it if you want, or you can have a proper read over it afterwards, whichever you prefer. But yeah, I think it's got a couple of approvals, so it's good to merge.
Can it add colons for us? Like if I'm lazy?
I actually can't remember whether it does that. It's possible it does because I am quite lazy and I probably didn't make all these changes myself. No, I don't think it does. It logs. I used Vim macros for that. Okay, moving on. So the next topic, which I've added 5 minutes for, is adding extensions to the request. Now, for full transparency, we have discussed this before. I proposed this back in 2022, August, and essentially this was part of, whilst I was working on writing up the GraphQL over HTTP specification, or refactoring it, rewriting it, whatever. I realized that the GraphQL over HTTP spec needs to specify the extensions key for requests, because it is used by various systems. So for example, Apollo use it to put the SHA 256 key in for a persisted query. So it is used at the transport layer. So my question back then was, should this be in the main spec? And Lee's initial thought, if I remember this correctly, was essentially that we don't need it because the spec itself doesn't rely on this. So we don't need to say anything about it. It's like, it's fine. It's just there. It's ambient. No one minds. The main concern that I have with that, and that I raised about that, is it means that every single transport spec that we write, GraphQL over HTTP, GraphQL over WebSockets, GraphQL over server-sent events, GraphQL over, I don't know, gRPC or anything else, has to now define this new concept each time, even though this is a common thing. We would want to do, for example, persisted queries over any of these transports. So this is a common thing, and we're expecting it to be something that vendors can use in a particular way. So my argument is effectively we do need it. I pulled out the notes. Let me find the pull request where I added this to the agenda. Here we go. So I'm going to link this in the chat. So when I filed this against the GraphQL working group in pull request 1494, I pulled out a link to the old notes, which were from September 2022, and the conclusion of which was, and this is from the notes, not the video, so it's not a direct quote, it's rough wording. Sounds like I have two options. Extensions may exist, be aware of it, or improve the section and do a better job of defining the input to execution. I think that just saying that extensions is a key that may exist on the request and is left there for vendor purposes, and this is the important bit, is an object, I think that's all we need. And the reason I think it's important to say that it's an object is because I would want different vendors to be able to work together in the same GraphQL client or whatever in order to add different keys in different places, like under vendor named prefixes, for example. So like you could have an Apollo key where they add their persisted operations. You could add a relay key where it adds whatever additional data that it needs. And for that to work, we need to say, if this is present, it must be an object. And I think that the GraphQL spec is the right place to put this. Anyway, I spoke about that for a while. My main aim here is to either have you guys all say, you people, sorry, all say, yes, this sounds legit, let's bump it to RFC1, or say, no, I don't think we need that in the spec. It's fine just doing it in the transport specs, in which case RFCX, close it. We give it a good reason and we don't talk about it again. Any thoughts?
I concur with your logic here. For reading through the notes, it's clear that the person who was most like pushback was Lee. I don't, if somebody else has similar pushback, that would be good, but I haven't heard it, and I'm a fan.
It seems like it belongs here, honestly. I wouldn't expect this in a transport level spec.
It does still seem a little bit strange in the context of that section, given that we're not specifying any other fields in the request except for extensions. Yeah, because we're in the execution section, so we're specifying things that explicitly are not in the HTTP request. Even like the schema, the GraphQL schema is part of the request in this context. And so in that light, it seems like it's not the right place in the spec. And I think that's because the right place in the spec doesn't exist. It's not in the spec. Now we could change that and include a little bit more about what a basic request looks like, in the same way that we do with the response. It could still be transport agnostic and include the things that are at this point pretty standard. And so it's kind of a case of the spec following the solidified practice. So So I'd be actually in favor of including this if we want to actually add a section somewhere that fleshes out the request shape.
Yeah, and that was definitely one of the paths that Lee laid out, as basically be more explicit about what each of the things are. I think that might be challenging to pull off, because what we're effectively saying is each of these things, we need them to be able to execute, but we don't specifically care how they're given to us. Like the document, it could come in as a source string and then be passed by your implementation, or it could come in as a pre-passed AST. There's various different options, and same kind of thing goes for the other things. Like variables could just be a tuple, because you know what the variables are by their names in the document, so you could specify it as a tuple rather than an object. It's kind of down to the implementation to decide. Now, I think it's important that extensions itself is an object for the reasons specified before, but these other things, we don't really have such strict requirements on them. I'm not aware of anyone having done it with a tuple. I'm just saying it's an option. So I'm hesitant to start that additional work of making this area more explicit when it rules out other options without really giving much benefit. Whereas to me, the addition of the extensions here is a clear benefit because it's being widely used in the ecosystem. So we should at least acknowledge that, in my opinion.
You kind of brought up your own case of the variables. I know that we have at times had array encoded variables. So it's just like, we're just doing the variables in the same order that they are present in the document, and we're not even encoding the name of the variable as a way to save a few bytes. And if we are okay with variables not being a strict map, it obviously needs to be a map that between the client and server, that they understand what that definition is. Then we're kind of saying any client and server needs some handshake that they've agreed on outside of the spec of GraphQL and the response shape, that how they coordinate how to get into the execution is outside of the spec. It might in fact be that GraphQL over HTTP or whatever, or GraphQL with pure JSON for getting into execution via JSON is where a spec for doing this in a consistent way is where it belongs. And we would expect things like Apollo and Relay and everybody else to implement that on top of implementing the spec. But sorry, Benji, you kind of swayed me the other way yourself.
So, Matt, it sounds like what you're saying is effectively we need a middle abstraction spec. So we've got the GraphQL spec, then we've got GraphQL over basically any transport that happens to use JSON spec, and then the GraphQL over HTTP spec uses this middle one. Yeah, I can see the value in that from a software engineering point of view.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, it's kind of silly because we use JSON as our examples for all response. So symmetry, for symmetry's sake, we probably should have a similar, this is an example of what the input might look like to your server. If you're going to, servers should probably implement this, but it's not spec non-compliant to have a different JSON format for the input to your server.
That said, the execution algorithm does assume that variable values is a map, right? So
Yeah.
at some
Yeah.
point, it becomes a map. So I wonder if what we're saying here really is this section here is saying, after whatever you've done with your tuples, this is actually like, it says currently values for any variables defined by the operation, but we could say the map of variables defined, and that would, whether you've done that from a tuple and then turn that into a map or whatever, that's up to you, but ultimately the value needs to be here. So maybe we do need to go the more explicit route. My question, as always, would be, is there any harm getting this in now and then doing that rewriting later / never? Is it not better to acknowledge it at all? Because I imagine that the larger change will be harder to get approval for. It will have to be more explicit, more carefully worded. Okay, hard way it is. Thanks, everyone. I think that's it from that topic. And I think that's it from the agenda, if I can find it, which I can't. So I'm just going to trust that that was it. We actually have 15 minutes left. Is there anything that anyone thought of that would like to be discussed? No, fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. Great discussion, and see you all again next month.
See ya.
Hi, everyone.
See you, everyone.